Hello, welcome to Warwickshire College Furniture Crafts. I'm Jamie Ward. This is a short film on setting up a spindle moulder. So in our workshop we have two. We have this machine and we have this machine here which has automatic feed. Before we go through the machine setup, we'll look at some tooling. So looking at some of the tooling we have in our workshop, we have a rebate or rabbit block, and there's an example of a rebate. We can use this up to 10,000 RPM. We have examples of tooling we can cut grooves with. So we have a fixed grooving saw. So this can be used up to 6,500 RPM, and that's 10 millimeters thick. We have adjustable grooving tooling here. So this one we can groove from 4 to 7.5 millimeters. And we can use between 5,200 and 8,900 RPM. And we have another adjustable grooving head. So this one we can change the sizes using these shims, and the actual groove can go between 8 and 15 millimeters by placing the shims between the two halves, depending on what size. And we can use this from 4,500 to 8,000 RPM. We have an adjustable bevel block. So this can be tilted over from 0 to 60 degrees, example there. We have a block we can place tooling cutters into. Safety feature for this is the chip limiting cutters. So it limits the cut. And we can see a range of tooling that we can produce, beads and moulds and round over edges here. So that's not exhaustive by any means. We have a bobbin sander, so we can place this onto the machine and use and cut or sand sort of templates and jigs and things. We can change the fence to a ring fence, so we can do shaped work. We can even change the spindle for tooling such as this. This is a dovetail cutter, and we can use it with a jig, so we can cut dovetails. And we can also change the tooling, the spindle, so we can place these comb jointing heads tooling in to cut a comb joint. So looking at the machine and naming some parts, we have the table, we have the fence, so the in feed and out feed, so we tend to feed right to left. We have the top guard and shore guard stroke pressure. The machine is isolated. We have the spindle we place the tooling on. So looking at some of the controls, we have the isolator on and off. We can run the machine. We can stop and break the machine. So stop the machine there. We can lock the spindle to change the tooling. And we can have the height adjustment, so we can undo the lock, and by moving the wheel we can raise and lower the spindle. So we mentioned when we looked at the tooling we can change the speed depending on the tooling. This machine runs from 3,000 to 9,000 revolutions per minute, so we can change the speed by putting the bout on the different pulleys. Okay, we're going to set up the spindle moulder to do a rebate or rabbit, like so. So first of all, we've marked out our components. In this case, we're going to do a 10 by 10 millimeter rebate. I've marked that on the face side. Component's going to go through like so. So to cut the rebate, we're going to use the rebate block. Going on the machine, I know that it rotates in this direction, so we feed against the cut. So, machine is isolated, switched off down there. I'll take the spacers off, carefully lift the block off the stand. I'm going to make sure the surfaces are clean. And then put the spacers back on, again making sure that the surfaces are clean. You find if they're not clean they can make the spindle vibrate when you're using it. So I've placed the nut on, showing hardly any thread. What I've done to lock the machine, lock the spindle, rotate the spindle handle to the left, and it basically puts a lock through the spindle. Then with the spanner, tighten up the nut, take the lock off, and then with our components, first of all, push the fence back. I've got my gauge marks on the component, locking nut undone, wheel on the side. I can then lower the block, the spindle down. I would suggest that if you're moving the spindle quite a significant amount, then you want to rotate the spindle. The reason being the bout will come off the back. If you move the spindle quite a significant distance, the bout tends to come off. So rotate the block to stop that from happening. And then I've got the spur, the scribing cutter on the top, my gauge mark. I'm just going to bring that down, and I tend to always set on the way up, so it supports it. Back to the rack and pinion sort of example where you want to set it up so it's supporting the tooling. Put the lock back on again, bring the fence forward. So I've set the height, now I need to set the depth. We tend to use, so you can see obviously there's a gap here, we tend to use a cover board which sits between the fences. Some workshops use a cover board which is pinned the whole length of the fence. The cover board is there for a number of reasons. One, it only allows the amount of block that you're using, so health and safety, only a small amount for the cutter block is projecting forward. Two, it improves the finish, it acts as a chip breaker. Three, when the guard's on the top, it also improves the extraction. So I'm just going to place that cover board in there like that, so just allows me to set the depth. If I place my component up against there, get a ruler, so I'm looking for a 10mm depth rebate. So if I place the component on the side there and then measure the maximum projection of cut, so through the centre of the spindle, and then measure 10mm. Some people just measure 10mm there, and you can actually buy stands, like a setting stand, like a horseshoe shape with a ruler in. So there's a number of ways of setting the depth. So I've set the depth, lock these off for the moment. And what I'm going to do is G-clamp 2 blocks on the back. So these back stops will allow me to pull the fence off, guard all the machine up, start it up, and then push back onto those stops. So I'm going to G-clamp those in the final position. Pull the fence forward, drop the cover board down, and now guard the machine up. So on this machine we make sure the guard, top guard, is just pushed back slightly from the face of the fence, otherwise this can get in the way. So just slightly back. Whilst I'm breaking through, I'm going to take the top pressure, the shore guard off, and we have a workshop made breakthrough guard to go in place there. So what we're going to do is turn the isolator on the wall and on the machine. The extraction will be on. I'm going to ensure that I'm wearing my PPE, eye protection and ear protection. I will turn the machine on and then break through, so pushing on the fence whilst the machine is going onto the stop. Things to look out for before I turn the isolator on is I'll make sure that this is free. I've ensured that the speed is set, so I'm going with a 3000 RPM, which is okay for the block that I'm using in the operation that I'm carrying out. So, what I've ensured I've done is broken through to the stops. I've braked the machine so it's stopped before I've carried on. I've turned the isolator off, and now I can take off the breakthrough guard. I can set up the pressure, shore guard. So if I place one component either side on the in-feed and the out-feed fence, place the pressure up against the side. You put a small amount of pressure on, tighten up, double check that grip in the wood, a little bit loose. And then set the top pressure . Like so. So what I'm going to do now is to take out the components. We have our test piece, so I'm going to turn the machine on, so the isolator back on, do a test cut, so I will push this probably just up to past the cutter block, back again, and then measure the rebate just to check that the dimensions are correct. And if I'm happy with that, then I will carry on. What I will use is push sticks. So I'll ensure that when I push this up to the start of the pressure, I'll use a push stick for the remaining amount. So I've measured the rebate, so I'm happy with the dimensions machined there. Things to point out, so if you were having to readjust, if the dimensions weren't correct, then you would have to go back through the same process of adjusting and setting the machine, maybe having to break through the guard again. Important considerations, ensure you use a push stick. Any bits that are in the way there, I would suggest you blow them out of the way, do not flick them with your fingers, and always make sure that you clear the table, the machine of your tools, make sure they're out of the way.